All righty, I believe we are live already. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We are excited to be here today. We have a lot to talk about in our program today. The topic for our program is called Work Culture Focus. We want to specifically address listen, care, change, and empathize. We have a lot to discuss today, and we want to thank our audience for joining in. What we really want to ask you to do is make sure you put in the comments that you're here, where you're coming in from, and as we go through the program, we want to encourage you to comment and ask questions because we'll see them and we'd love to address them. I'm Michelle Beauchamp. My company is called the Champ Group, where I love helping people to unleash their inner champ. I focus on leadership development as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion. I am excited to introduce our guest today, Bernadette Jones. And here's a cool thing about Bernadette. We just met. We met when we were at in Monterey at the SHRM Regional Conference. And Bernadette introduced me, and we said, hey, you know what? Let's get together. So we met and we thought, hey, you know what? We have a lot to talk about. We should do a program. So
Mhm.
that is the power of connections. So before we move forward, Bernadette, give us a little bit of an overview about what you do.
Good morning, and thank you so much, Michelle, for this invitation. And just a little bit about me. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Vision Over HR Consulting and Training, where we really focus on helping our clients create intentional, inclusive workplaces that focus on not only culture, but also compliance, and how compliance supports your culture and your culture can support compliance in the organization. So we are looking to work with leaders who are intentional. And if you're not, to help you get there.
I love it. I love it. The goal is intentionality and you can help them get there. So that's why it's so important that we talk today about culture. So, I thought it
Mhm.
would be important for us. Let's just discuss, what does culture even mean? I mean, we hear that word a lot. Paying attention to it a lot more and seeing it a lot more than it used to be. And as
Mhm.
I think about it, I think of a couple of sides, right? Because sometimes there's a gap and sometimes there's a match. Leaders, for sure, want their cultures to be high performing cultures, right? High performance, that's what leaders want. Employees want to perform with high performance, but they also want to feel as though they belong. Like, this is the right place for me. They want to make sure now more than ever that their personal and professional goals are in alignment with the company's goals and mission. So that's another thing that people need from culture. And then the other thing people want to know is, do I work in a culture where when I do a great job, I'll be able to know what I need to do and how I can advance to the next level? So when we think about culture, that's what we're going to talk about today. And specifically, we want to talk about listen. We know we need to listen. The question is, how well do we do that? And then we want to talk about care, right? People want to know that the people who they work with and who they work for care, right? And then we
Mhm.
want to talk about change. Change. We have had so much change in the last few years, excuse me, and we know that. So, how are we dealing with the change? And then, last and certainly not least, excuse me, is empathize. And so, I want to talk. I want to start by talking about empathize, and then Bernadette, I want to ask you about this. It is so important for people to realize that other people have a lot of stuff going on.
Mhm.
So that's why we say, before you jump into your meeting, check in with people and see how are they doing. Let me give you an example, audience. I learned last week as we were preparing for this that Bernadette was in the process of moving. Oh my gosh. So what that told me was, I am so glad she said she could still do our program today because we know moving is very stressful. So she has a lot of stuff going on. The other thing that was happening with me is that I was out of town because we had a friend, a very dear friend, pass away, and we were gone to go to his funeral services. So I had a lot of stuff going on. And it is so important, again, for us to empathize with each other, ask people, how are you really feeling? That's so important. So Bernadette, I want to start by asking you, and again, thank you for saying yes, and you're moving and you still said yes.
Yes.
How are you encouraging your people and your clients and their employees to empathize with each other?
Well, I think the first way that I'm encouraging them to do that is to build a culture around trust and feedback. And so when you're asking those questions, how really are you doing? You're really listening, right? So that you can empathize, so you can understand where your coworkers, your direct reports, where they are in their life and what's going on for them. I often share one way is to ask, how can I support you?
Okay, that's a good one. How
Yes.
can I support you? Yeah,
Mhm.
that's a good
Especially as
one.
leaders, we want to know, how can I support you? Not the organization, not your coworkers, but how can I support you? And coming, from another coworker is just as important. So that's one really great way to be able to empathize and
Good.
let people know you care.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
such a good start. Here's what I want to do is I'm looking here at the comments and I want to give a shout out to some of the people who are here with us today. We've got Mimi. Hey, Mimi. Thank you for joining.
Mhm.
Mimi is a speaker coach. We got Asha, who focuses on work culture and DEI. We've got Melissa, who is at a law firm, Sklar Kirsch. Uh, Tio Delinda, she is, I think that's somebody that you know, right? She's a
I do.
specialist apprentice. Alina. So we got a lot of people here. We want to, Louise and Ryan. Shout out to all of you. So we want to have you to continue to participate. And then as we're going forward, be sure and ask questions or put your comments in. So one tool already that you got is ask how I can help. That's what Bernadette
Mhm.
said. So continuing on with that theme, showing that you care. I want to talk a little about caring within the context in the workplace since COVID because it's different now.
Mhm.
There was a time when people did work remote, but that was kind of unusual. Now it's a standard, right?
Right.
So, how people show that they care on the screen. Some are in the room, some are on the screen. What are you seeing? What are you seeing in the workplaces there, Bernadette? And what are you doing to help them show that they care?
Mhm. Well, one of the things I'm seeing is that there is a desire, which is understandable, to move forward past COVID. But at the same time, there's not the recognition that COVID is not over. It's had huge impacts and it will continue for years and years to have impact. So one of the things is recognizing that so many people have been impacted. They may have lost loved ones, so that they're bringing that angst, anxiety into the workplace. And then there are many people who are still impacted, though they've recovered from COVID. They may have long COVID. I just
Mm,
learned about a report that came out in August, and they talked about long COVID, and actually
mhm,
about 4 million people of working age are out of the workplace because of long COVID,
mm. That's a
continuing
lot of
symptoms,
people.
huge number of people. So when we're thinking about where are all the missing workers, we have this shortage of talent. People have left the workplace. That's 4 million of them. And that's what that came from the Brookings Institute, a survey on long COVID and the impact. So as employers and in the workplace, we need to be aware of that. We need to know that people may still have some symptoms. We need to look at accommodations, sick leave. Maybe we need to increase that sick leave. But having those conversations, like, how can I support you? That ties in. You may be able to support them by having more of a flexible schedule. Different things you can do to mitigate some of the challenges that they're having because of COVID, either themselves or a family member.
Mhm.
So if we think about COVID and always just be, how can we support? How can we help?
Yeah. Yeah. And are you finding that companies are willing to do that? I mean, excuse me, I'm still getting over this darn cold. Are you finding that companies are willing to do that or they know they should do it, but they're not sure how to get started? Like, how do you advise them to get started in supporting?
Yes, yes. So I'm finding all of that. Some companies are more than willing to do it. Others are like, well, how can I? I'm a smaller organization, maybe, and there's only so much accommodation that they are able to do. So
Hmm.
helping them to look at things from a different lens. There are different supports out there that can give you ideas around accommodations, what can be done for folks that are being challenged with these symptoms or with family members. But again, it's being doing your research. There's a lot out there that can help, so finding out where these organizations are. So I've been helping clients to do that, to find out where these organizations are. How can you get the support? What kind of creative accommodations can you make, rather than saying, well, I can't do that? Well, what
Right.
can you do? right?
I
And
like
so,
that.
yeah, so that's part of how I can support you. And then just educating people so that they understand that COVID is still impacting the workplace. And so
Yeah.
we have to be aware of that and really be empathetic to
Mhm.
people who are still dealing with it.
Okay. Yeah. That's such a good message because people tend to think, oh, we're over COVID. Well, we're not. And then here we come in the fall now, fall, winter. So we have the expectation that it's going to be more challenging. So in the workplace, asking, I love how you said it, what can we do rather than
Mhm.
no, we can't do that. Like, what is it that we can do, right? And how willing are we to be able to do that? I know one of the things in the John Maxwell program that I'm in that I learn from him and say a lot is that people are always evaluating. We all know about the great resignation, right? So
Mhm.
one way that we can help people stay is by showing that we do care for them because people are wondering typically a few things. One is, how's that person going to help me? So for example, if I'm struggling with long COVID, what can my boss, what can my peer do to help me, right? So they're trying to
Mhm.
figure that out. And by you saying what can we do versus what we can't do, that's showing that we're willing to help. And the other thing people want to know is, do they care for me? I mean,
Right.
that kind of translates like, do I like them? And do they like me, right? So it does
Exactly.
translate that way. And when we recognize that we can show that we care, then
Mhm.
we are willing to think outside the box. Even though we didn't do that way in the past, this is what we can do now.
Right.
And the other thing that we're going to talk a bit more about is people are always trying to figure out, can I trust them? Like, can I trust my boss to let him or her know that
Mhm.
I'm struggling with this? Like I talked about, like you were dealing with stuff, I was dealing with stuff. Can I trust that person to let them know and not have it come back to haunt me? So there's so many things that associate with caring. We really want people to care. And then now here's something that I know you deal with too. And thank goodness we as a country, as a society, are realizing the importance of mental well-being. So
Mhm.
you and I were talking a little bit about creating a mental health friendly workplace. And I'm sure our audience would love to know. And don't forget, audience, chime in with questions or comments. What does a mental health friendly workplace look like?
Well, it looks like leadership that's intentional, being intentional about building a workplace where mental health is not a stigma.
Mm,
There's no
mhm,
stigma attached to it, that
mhm,
people can have a conversation and say, I'm suffering from anxiety, or this is not a good day for me. So that is all about messaging and about what you do. So if your organization is putting out the message that we know emotional and mental health are challenges now in this pandemic era, even more so. Before the pandemic, I would say my clients, I got calls a couple times a month about helping with how do I deal with this challenge an employee is having around emotional mental health
mhm,
that's impacting the workplace. Now I get those calls so frequently,
mhm.
many times per month from clients. And one of the biggest things is about mental and emotional health.
Yeah.
So, saying that this is an issue in this era, and we want to be able to assist, not just saying it, but then looking at what can you do? How can you support them? So if your medical benefits, do they have benefits for mental and emotional health? Do they have anxiety classes? Dig into that and find out
Mhm,
what are you already providing that your
mhm,
people may not even know about. If you have an employee assistance plan, dig into
mm,
that and
mhm.
ask them about additional resources that they may have for training, for workshops, all those kinds of things. So know what you already have and then
Right.
where you want to supplement to give
Mhm,
that support and ask for feedback. So if you want to know, take a poll. It could be an anonymous poll, what kind of challenges might they be having, and then
right.
arrange for some coaching. Maybe you can have a coach come in and, do a Zoom training if you're not in person to help with anxiety and
Mhm,
emotional challenges in the workplace. So
mhm.
those are the things. Think about what is it? How can I offer that additional support? And it just be part of the conversation. It's not
Yeah,
a secret. If everybody
yeah,
thinks it's a secret, then nobody's going to want to talk because they
right.
will feel like they're going to get that pushback later on, but it's not a.
Yeah. And I like what you said too, because it used to be a stigma, right? And so it
Mhm.
sounds like it's really a change in mindset that we need to have.
Yes,
I mean, in the past, there was a mindset, oh, there's something wrong with that person. Thank goodness we're moving past that now.
right.
And I'm hoping we're able to continue to help leaders and employees and everyone feel that way. It's a mindset because, like we said in the beginning, we all have stuff going on.
Mhm.
And when we say we want a culture of belonging where people can bring their authentic self, then that means they can feel safe to say, you know what, I prefer not to have too many conversations today because I'm just going to focus on my work because I'm not really feeling good today. And respecting that rather than judging it, right? And
Mhm.
making some kind of implication about that. So, as we're talking about this, another thing I want to talk about that I talk about quite a bit with my clients, and that is creating safe spaces. For example, I tell you what, I was doing a training a couple of weeks ago on leadership traits. And so the people who were in that class were leaders. And what they were saying was that their leaders weren't really creating a safe space. In other
Mhm.
words, they didn't feel like it was so safe for them to disagree with their leader. It's like, very bureaucratic. They didn't feel like it was safe to say, hey, you know what, I have another idea, right? They didn't feel safe to raise their hand and contribute or challenge.
Mhm.
So the more we can help employers understand that people have a yearning to feel like they belong, to learn more, to add value by contributing. I mean, they're there because they've probably had other jobs or they've had other experiences, and we can learn from each other. So I'm just curious, what do you tell your employers in that kind of situation?
Well, mostly I tell them that it starts from the top. It starts from
Yeah.
leadership. So if you are open to receiving that feedback and a challenge or a question,
Mm-hmm.
then people will be willing to do that. But if you're not open, nobody's going to share. And
Mm-hmm.
so the first thing is to invite the feedback. Be
Mm-hmm.
specific. Can you give me some feedback or tell me what you thought about this meeting? Tell me what you think about this project. So you're
Mm-hmm.
specifically asking for feedback. So if you ask for it, then people will begin to feel comfortable volunteering. But
Yeah.
if you never ask for it and you say, oh, I have open door. Well, what does that really mean? Right? Like,
Yeah.
well, your door is open. What does that mean? Does that, I had one client who literally thought it meant the door was open. The physical door was open.
Right. Okay.
So what does that really mean?
Yeah. And you know what? Kind of on it. And I did put this next banner up. It says create a culture of feedback and trust because we're talking about that. But really quick about the open door. How do people show they have an open door when they're in a remote environment? What do
Yes,
you see? How do you show you have an open door with that? Do you have some ideas on that?
I do. The first thing I say is the same thing. Ask those questions. Meet and make your meetings meaningful. So ask for feedback around the meeting. How do you feel? How are things going in the remote workspace for you? Be specific about the information that you want. And I had this question in a training last month. I was asked, well, how do you build trust in a remote environment? Is difficult. You don't
Yeah.
have the body language. You don't have those interactions where you just stop by someone's desk and have a
Right.
conversation.
Right.
And so, how do you do that? And one of the things I said, the first thing is to set expectations.
Okay.
So, if I'm in
Okay.
a remote work environment, what are the expectations? Am I expected to have my camera on?
Yes.
And so do I know that?
Right.
Do people know that that's the expectations? And if you can't, then just say, hey, this is not a great day for me. Be willing to change and accommodate and be empathetic, but know
Hmm.
what your expectations are.
Okay. That's a
That's
good
how
start.
you build trust. If I know
Hmm.
what's expected of me, I can be more trustful because I don't think I'm not going to be surprised and like,
Hmm.
oh, I didn't know that was a problem if I didn't have my camera on,
Right.
right? So
That's so
setting
important. I just have to tell you, not to interrupt,
yes,
but I love when I know what the culture is, right? It's like, okay, the culture is no cameras. I do typically say, if everybody's okay with that, if you're okay with that, could you please turn your camera on? Because I'm able to communicate better with you, and you're able to communicate because I can see your face, right?
Right.
And if you don't feel like it, then all good, right? So again, no judging. So I love it, creating the expectation. I do see
Right.
that Louise put a comment in here that said psychological safety is so critical. It is so critical. It
Yes.
really is so critical. Yeah, it
Hmm.
is really critical. And so, kind of continuing on with that feedback and trust. So now that we're in the middle of November, so that means that most companies are in the process of preparing for performance reviews, right?
Right.
I mean,
Mhm.
here's what we know. You know this, I know this, a lot of people know this, right? Is that performance reviews are important and they shouldn't just happen once a year, right? But this
Exactly.
is the time of the year that most people do prepare to give and receive the feedback, right?
Hmm.
We know that the feedback is important on an ongoing basis. And, I see companies have typical quarterly reviews, and I think that's good too. What I like to encourage people, though, is give 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 feedback often. I was reading a survey recently, Bernadette, that said
Hmm.
that only 20% of the people surveyed said that they got feedback weekly. So what
Yes.
that told me was that they expected feedback a lot, like weekly, right?
Right.
So I really want to encourage people to give feedback, but it does require so much trust. Um, and you said earlier, you said it needs to be clear, right? I mean, it has to be. So I'm going to want this report by Tuesday at 2 o'clock,
Right.
rather than whenever you get to it or sometime next week. So you're right. I agree with you. You have to create the expectation. You have to make it clear. What else would you say in terms of a culture of feedback to show that it's listening, it's caring, it's changing, and it's empathetic? What else would you say about that?
I would say develop I call it a trust conversation that
Mm-hmm.
you have with coworkers, with direct reports, just setting it up so they know that our relationship is important. And so I'm going to want to give you feedback, and I want you to give me feedback too, whether it's feedback for improvement, positive feedback. We want to have those conversations so that when it happens, it's not a shock.
Mm-hmm.
Or the only time I get feedback is when there's a problem. And so that is going to cut off trust right away. If
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh, here she comes, with some more feedback, and
Right.
every time it's negative, it's critical.
Right.
There are opportunities to give positive feedback
For
all the
sure.
time. You
Yes.
just have to look for it. We're human, so we see the negative
Right.
very easily. So sometimes it takes some more effort to really recognize the positive, and recognize that, and encourage and give that feedback. And then people are expecting it, and I'm expecting you to give me feedback too.
Yeah. Hopefully it's two ways, right? It's
It's two
it's it's
ways.
two ways. Here's an interesting comment from Chanel. Interestingly, I've seen some employees say they are tired of giving feedback or that there are too many
Mhm.
surveys. I think it's so important to invite feedback, but to act on that and to openly discuss it. Thank you, Chanel. True, that's a good point. And while we're on that subject, let me share what Alina said. Setting
Mhm.
expectations is the number one coaching tool I provide leaders. Right, this is
Yes.
a foundation of any relationship. So we
Mhm.
definitely appreciate the input from our audience regarding feedback and trust. And sometimes it could. And I think one important thing I want to take away too is it's two ways. It's not like just the
Yes.
boss saying, I want to give you some feedback. In fact, I can remember back to when I had a boss that said that, and I thought, oh brother, here we go. So I didn't perceive it as being a positive thing. So feedback is both ways. And the leaders have to understand they might be prepared to give feedback. And there might be something that the employee that they're giving feedback to has to say, well, you know what? There was a misunderstanding then because dot dot dot, right? So we
Exactly.
have to be willing to share. So it's
Mhm.
it's it's not just one way. It's both ways.
Right. And then we're both learning this process together around giving feedback. Most of us have not had training on how to give feedback or how to receive it. So I've heard the same thing that Chanel mentioned about people that I'm tired of feedback,
Right.
and giving feedback and the surveys, because oftentimes, like you mentioned, Michelle, the feedback is not acted upon. And so just feedback for the sake of feedback, and you make no attempt to improve, or whatever that needs to happen doesn't happen, then no, I don't want to give any feedback either.
Right.
But there
Right.
was a survey that I saw also 40% of employees believe that their leadership will not give them honest information about work and about work challenges. So people want feedback. It's
Yeah,
the kind of feedback that you're giving is when
exactly.
there is a problem.
You know what? That's interesting too. And we have a couple more topics, but kind of on this, another thing that I've seen statistic I saw recently too was men tend to not want to give women honest feedback
Mm.
because they feel as though they want to be more nurtured than get feedback. And so one of the things that I want to make sure is encourage all leaders to give honest feedback, and for, everybody deserves feedback, because if we don't get feedback, positive or negative, how can we continue to do really well if it's positive? And if we didn't do well on something, how will we know? And so how will we change if we don't discover that? So it's so important. We could talk a lot on this. We might have to do a part two. I'm going to go over here to listen too, because that's one of the things that somebody wanted to talk about in terms of work culture focus, and that is listen. So we know we need to listen. We all know that. That is not a news flash. The question though is, how well are we listening? Right? That's the that's the question. So what's your take on that? How are you helping leaders understand that listening needs to be kind of what you said in the beginning, intentional, right?
Mhm.
Um, and how are you helping them to become more intentional, to be such a good listener, which is so critical?
Yeah, I think one way to do that is surveys. So
Okay.
they don't have to be big, long surveys. There are
Mm-hmm.
these little questions that you're asking about different things.
Mm-hmm.
Listen so you can hear where the challenges are, what you can do better. But the listening is, and I know everybody knows this, but we need to hear it again. We're listening to hear and not to respond.
Right.
And that's a challenge. It's a challenge for me, because I'm thinking as you're talking, and
Right.
you're thinking of a response or how to respond, how to help, all those kinds of things. And it's difficult just to quiet your mind and
Mm-hmm.
listen
Mm-hmm.
to hear and not to respond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if we do that, you're going to be a lot better at giving and receiving feedback and building
Right.
trust, because I know
Yeah.
you have my best interests at heart. It's not just about, okay, I need to respond to what you're saying. I'm
Right.
really
And
listening.
yeah. And thanks for that reminder, because we are all guilty of it. But when we intentionally listen, and here, kind of going back to feedback, and this has to do with listening too. This is what Louise said. If leaders are asked for feedback and create that culture, that feedback is good. When it comes time to give feedback, it's more natural discussion. Thank you, Louise.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yes.
100%. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
So I
definitely.
wanted to add something real quick about the performance review, that annual review. I encourage my clients to do a quick 15-minute check in every month, right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
anything that's going on, I know
Good.
about. So at the end of the year, it's not a big surprise.
Right.
And I have 12, and document that. What did we talk about? I have 12 documents that I can use to build a performance review rather than trying to remember
Exactly. Right.
everything that happened or
Right.
just focusing on the last couple months, which is not fair. Maybe my last two couple months weren't great, but the rest of the year was really good. But by the time you get there, you've forgotten.
Right.
So that short, frequent feedback is so critical to building trust.
And to your point, documenting it, because you know what, we all have a lot going on. We're not going to remember it. So
Mhm.
documenting it is also critical. So the last part of our work culture focus is change. And I put resilient on there also. So we all know we've had a lot of change. Here's the
Mhm.
question, is how willing are we to change? We've talked about a lot of things today. How willing are we? How willing are our leaders to change policies, procedures, and to demonstrate that they're willing to do it, and show the resilience. So um, we only have about 2 more minutes. So do you have something to add? Now that time went fast. Do you have something you'd like to say about that?
I just say be intentional about the changes. Whatever change that has to happen, be intentional about that change.
There you
You
go.
know it's coming up. Don't just let it happen. Communicate about why it's happening. Is it a good change? If the things are whatever's change is happening, if it's going to be difficult, how can we make it easier? But that communication about the change, I think, is really critical, and that's going to allow people to be resilient because now
Exactly.
I can prepare for it if
Right.
I know about it.
There you go. So thank you. And then, and again, to show you care, because that was part of our work focus as well. And I like to share this little acronym that I like to use for care. C is for compassion. The A is for affirm others. The R is respect, and the E is evolve. And so, with that, we're going to show our contact information because we really appreciate our guests being here today and contributing those amazing comments too. See, we love this because we all can learn from each other and we can all share. So we would love for you to reach out to us. My contact information is there. Bernadette's contact information is there. Please go ahead and take a picture of that. We'd love to hear from you. And with that, because our time is up, um, thank you, guests. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. You had many choices about what you could do today, and you chose to spend time with us. And we really value that and really hope that our intention was to provide you some value and some nuggets. And we really hope that we achieve that. And Bernadette, thank you so much. And I guess I'll have to end the broadcast there.